there is right and there is wrong, and right is staying married, and getting a divorce is wrong. And that is not real, because in reality, no matter who files for divorce, and by the time people do file for divorce, they have grappled in agony for years. No one wants to get a divorce. No one gets married to want to get a divorce.
How long have you been a divorce attorney?
Almost 20 years. Yeah, I graduated law school in 2005, and I've always been a divorce attorney.
How many clients do you think you've helped or seen?
That's an interesting question. Probably thousands. My law firm sees 300 clients a year, talks to 1,200 people a year. I've talked to the vast majority of those people. So I have spent almost 20 years talking to people all day long about their marriages and their divorces.
If there's one divorce that stuck with you over the years, can you share a little bit about it?
Yeah, I have a client who has been through a really, really rough divorce. And she was Mormon, she was a stay-at-home mom, she had a couple kids, and was treated pretty poorly during her marriage. It was a pretty volatile relationship. It's not surprising to either of them that they're getting divorced, but the process has been brutal. Lots of hiding money, lots of terrible litigation, lots of using intimate videos of them during their marriage against her. Just pretty brutal.
When you look back, is this something you've always wanted to do? Does this still fulfill you, helping people through divorces?
I love it. I love it. I love it because it's very real, and it's raw. And even though I've been doing it for 20 years and there are patterns, every person is different. Every relationship is different. And so it's nice to be able to get to know people on a very intimate level. The conflict can get tough, and divorce attorneys burn out because we really do take on so much of what our clients are going through. We really love our clients and believe in our clients.
Going through your parents' divorce in college, did that affect you wanting to be an attorney in family law and an advocate for people?
Yes, so I knew I was going to be a lawyer really pretty early on. That wasn't hard, but my parents went through divorce when I was just headed to college, knowing I was going to go to law school. And because I was a young adult, it's interesting when you are a young adult or even an adult, you see sides of your parents' divorce that you wouldn't see if you were a young kid. And so I was getting a lot of the gory details. Not something I would recommend. Not something I would recommend. But yes, at that point I decided, I'm going to be a family law attorney. This makes perfect sense. This is people law. This is not, I didn't want to be a paper pusher or a contract writer. It's litigation. It's in the courtroom. Real. It affects families and humans, and that's why I wanted to do it.
Compared to how your mom was treated 20 some years ago to how you were treated recently, post-divorce, how has that changed?
Treated by who?
Society, your inner circle.
I don't know, because I don't know how she experienced her divorce from society. My mom went through a divorce. She left the state and started a whole new life, and there's a whole lot of pros to doing it that way. And in my divorce, like many modern divorces, I didn't change communities. My kids didn't change schools. So you have to become a new person within a society that knows you as a married person, as a couple. And what happens when you're married over time is you are known as, Bob and Susie or whatever. You are not really even known as a separate person. And so to become an individual in your community can be hard. But a lot of people do it. At the same time, divorce happens and many couples transition peacefully as friends. That was not my experience. I had a very, very high conflict divorce.
Do you think there's a stigma to the one who initiates the divorce? And is that different for men or women?
Is there a stigma? It depends on your community. So if you are in a community that is a conservative religious community, then yes, absolutely. There is right and there is wrong, and right is staying married, and getting a divorce is wrong. And that is not real. It is not real. Because in reality, no matter who files for divorce, and by the time people do file for divorce, they have grappled in agony for years. No one wants to get a divorce. No one gets married to want to get a divorce. And it is the ultimate failure. It is the worst thing somebody can go through. You feel like you're failing your children. You feel like you're failing your community. You feel like you're failing your religion. You feel like all of these years you put in are wasted. Nobody gets a divorce flippantly that I have ever seen. So I don't look at people who have gotten divorced as the villain. There is no villain and victim. That's just not real.
And what are you seeing right now? Who is initiating divorces?
Women are initiating divorces. 69 or 67% of the time, women are initiating divorces. Because by and large, in general, marriage is not working as well for women as marriage is working for men.
Explain that. Let's talk about that.
Well, society has changed rapidly over the last few generations. And I think that that's always the case, right? Always. One generation to the next is always different. But gender has changed incredibly. Economic resources have changed tremendously. Women's earning power as compared to men's, we know it's still less than men's, but in general, it has risen rapidly. And I've heard a lot about, what different generations did, and how my mother's generation, my mother always worked, but she probably also took on the majority of the tasks at home. And I think my parents were a little different than most, but many women of the generation before mine, so that would have been Gen X or baby boomers, they fought for their right to be in the workplace and also do everything they did as a stay-at-home mom. And women who are millennials and later don't want that role, don't want that deal. They don't want the deal that is, I'm gonna go out, I'm gonna work full time, I'm gonna bring home as much money or work just as hard and take on all of the responsibilities at home. And with that, when couples are not able to work that out, women feel disrespected. And they don't want to be in a relationship where they are taking care of their spouse and their children. So that is, of course, leading to a lot of resentment within a marriage. Now that's just one issue, and that wasn't the case for me. And sometimes I think the biggest reason people get divorced is basic incompatibility. Like if you get married to somebody that you're not all that compatible with, life is gonna get harder. Yeah. You're gonna add kids, things are gonna get harder, you're both gonna change as humans, and you might change in the same direction and you might not. And so it's kind of a crapshoot whether or not you're going to be able to grow together and be happy and healthy and fulfilled, or if you're going to end up miserable and unable to fix it.
Have you ever heard of a happy marriage being described as winning the lottery?
I have. I've heard it, and I think it's spot on. I think it's spot on. It's why I just cannot get remarried, because the vows are so unrealistic. You cannot know if till death do you part will work. You cannot know. There's no way to know. 1,000 things could change. 1,000 things could happen, and you may or may not be able to stay married. You cannot stay married if you're being abused. You cannot stay married if your children are being abused. You cannot stay married if your spouse is bleeding you dry financially and making hugely risky decisions. You cannot stay married if you're married to an addict, and any day that addict might go out and get into a car wreck and wreck your entire future because now you're getting sued. There are conditions under which staying married is dangerous, more dangerous than getting divorced. And that is usually when somebody decides to get divorced. their future, their future is riskier with the person they've tied their hitch to.
So would you consider yourself pro-marriage? Like, would you want your kids to get married?
I don't want my kids to get married or not get married. Marriage is an interesting thing. It's really, really celebrated in our society, and it's very, very important, and it's the foundation of a lot of what happens in our society. And yet more and more people are not getting married but having the same types of relationships. I know people who, my business partner in Win Without Law School has been with her partner for 20 years. They have a child, they have a house, and they chose not to get married. They have the same relationship as somebody who is married. So in reality, marriage is a certificate from the state and a set of rules that you've opted into, but it's at will. So really, it's not very different than two people who decide to hitch their wagons together and go through life together.
Yeah, and you think there's a presumption that you should get married?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, people are very uncomfortable when other people aren't married. They don't know what to do with it. It's definitely not as legitimate, and it somehow feels less stable or less valuable. Like there's something wrong with you if you're not married.
Yeah, you're less likely to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend in your 40s and 50s. It's looked less highly upon.
Definitely not. No. It's so dismissive. So, and I have chosen not to get married to my partner. And our relationship is like, I don't know, infinitely stronger than my marriage ever was. Infinitely healthier than my marriage ever was. It's great. I'm very, very grateful for it. And I don't want to get married. But society sees that as so much less than someone who's married.
Do you think it's negligent to get married?
I've heard this concept that it's negligent to get married. And I do think it is negligent not to understand the consequences of getting married and how hard it is to get unmarried and the rules of engagement once you get married legally. So when you get married, you are legally opting into a construct, whether you like it or not. And it's similar to, you can die with a will or with a trust and then give away your property the way you want to, or you can die without a will and without a trust and the state will make those decisions for you. And that is exactly what happens right now every day when people get married. They have handed over all of those future decisions. If they get divorced, which, let's be honest, that chance is always there. It's always there. It would be negligent not to consider that as an option, as a possibility that might happen to you despite you doing everything right. Somebody might leave you. And you've opted into a set of rules that many people have never read and do not understand. And they're brutal.
And it seems pretty easy to get married.
It's very easy to get married. You can go to Vegas and get married. You can go to the courthouse and get married. You can get married for no money and no thought. You can get married at a day's notice, right? You and somebody on the street could decide to go get married and be married.
So in that sense, you'll never be out of business with how easy it is to get married and how hard it is to get divorced.
My business it just grows. It never shrinks. We don't have to try that hard. People problems are never going to go away. Relationships are hard. Relationships are complicated. They don't always work. And then you unfortunately need someone like me to help you get out when all you needed to get in was $50 and a trip to the courthouse.
What do you think is a key to a happy marriage?
I think the most important thing is compatibility and the ability to understand each other and to see the world similarly. And I think if you see the world similarly and you can communicate and you can understand each other, that it's much easier to solve the problems together that life will inevitably throw at you.
Do you think it's hard to stay married in our current climate, with social media?
I think it is hard to stay married in our current climate because it's hard to stay married. It's hard to stay in a relationship and make it healthy and make it fulfilling and make it functional and make it work for a long time. I have not seen too many people get on social media and kind of fantasize about how their life could be different and get divorced flippantly. It must happen, but maybe those are not the people that are coming to see me. The people who are coming to see me mostly have agonized over the decision and don't want to get divorced.
So what are you seeing? What are the leading causes for people coming into your office?
So I've thought about this so much, so much, because I was married throughout, I got married my first year in law school. And so I practiced law. I practiced divorce law from the moment I got married until the moment I got divorced. And I was obsessed with studying the people who were coming in. And I came to the conclusion that the reason people get divorced is they've got problems in their marriage that is a deal breaker for one of them. And they're unable to fix that problem. And so maybe it's not today that they get divorced, but eventually you will get divorced if you have a problem in your marriage that you can't live with long term. So that could be anything. It could be, I don't like the way you treat our children. You know, for somebody who's married to an abusive spouse, eventually you will leave. Or it could be, I don't like the way you go out and gamble all of our money away. You'll stay until eventually you'll leave. I don't like the way you treat me. I don't like the way you disrespect me and, you know, don't let me have access to money or force me to have sex or whatever it is. I don't like the way you dismiss me, and I can't live with that forever. We either fix it or we'll eventually get divorced.
Those are really big topics. Do you see people filing for divorce who have dealt with smaller things like disrespect and neglect building up over time, not so much gambling and infidelity?
Yes, I do. I'm thinking about a divorce I did not that long ago. You know, most of the time when people get divorced and they're able to stay friends, they're fairly compatible, but they were not able to get their needs met within that relationship. And so I was such a proponent in my marriage of, hey, if I ever see a deal breaker, or if you ever see a deal breaker, like, we got to fix it. We have got to, like, buckle down and call it what it is and get into counseling and fix it. And I think if people had the ability to do that, those couples that get divorced but stay friends, who were probably pretty compatible, if they had the ability to know, like, listen, you tracking me all the time on my phone makes me feel like you don't trust me and smothered, and I'm not okay with it. Like, we have to come up with a different way to meet whatever needs you have, because I cannot live like this long term. And eventually it will lead to us getting divorced. Like, being willing to say that. Like, eventually, if we don't change this thing, we will end up divorced. Please work together now to fix it. Because what usually happens is somebody's said that, or maybe they haven't communicated it quite that clearly, but somebody's felt that way and they've said, hey, you're not meeting my needs, hey, you're not meeting my needs, hey, you're not meeting my needs, and eventually they are done and there's no coming back. And that's when the other person finally hears them and tries to come back, and it is too late.
Do you ever see people come in and not get divorced?
Yes, and there's sometimes when people come in and I'm like, this is savable. This is savable. Go have this conversation. Try. You're not done. I can hear that you still love your spouse.
Do you feel like your background as a divorce attorney impacted you negatively or positively in your decision to get a divorce?
I've done thousands of consultations. And for many years, I was having consultations, and I was so grateful that this wasn't my life. I was so grateful, and I would go home and just be so grateful and just be like, I'm so happy that we don't have those problems. And then there was this shift when I was listening to people going through their consultations, and I was like, oh shit, this is my life. Like, oh shit, yeah, I get it. I understand what you're saying. And it was pretty terrible. That was when I realized, like, we gotta do something. But we, at that point, just, like, couldn't hear each other.
Yeah. Did you and your ex-husband have a prenup?
No, we did not have a prenup.
Do you think they're wise?
Yes, I think they're very wise.
Talk to us a little bit about prenups and what they are and why you think they're important.
Well, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you get married, you are opting into a construct, and you probably don't even know what that is. And the construct is different if you move to a different state. So you're opting into a construct where you live at that moment in the state that you reside in. And it is non-applicable if you move. So if you move, so Oregon, where I used to live, is a separate property state. And Arizona is a community property state, different rules. But if you get divorced in a community property state, the community property state will treat all of your property as if it is community property, regardless of where you acquired it and whether or not it was separate in the other state. So you are just really gambling and signing yourself up for fighting and conflict, because the only way to get divorced in our current system is an adversarial one. It really, otherwise you have to go ask people who are falling apart to work out complex issues that they don't have to work out. Because there's plenty of ways to fight about how things should be handled. Our system is set up in an adversarial system for people to fight one another. What do we want to do about this or this or this or this in the event that we find ourselves, one of us leaves for whatever reason? What would be fair? And honestly, they should probably be revisited every 5 years, because your property changes, your situation changes. When I got married, I was 21 and my spouse was 25, and he was the majority earner and continued to be for quite some time. But then that switched. And so even that dynamic changing causes a lot of problems in marriages.
What are some things that you wish young engaged couples would talk about? Finances, how they fight, who's going to be the earner, who's going to take care of the kids? What are some things you see again and again that you're like, oh, I really wish you guys would have discussed that before getting married?
So right now, I would say the people who usually get prenups are older couples who have assets. And the general thought is there's no reason to get a prenup if we don't have anything. And that was what I thought. There's no reason to get a prenup if we don't have anything. And honestly, like a prenup, if I'd gotten a prenup, it probably wouldn't have been relevant by the time I got divorced. You really responsibly probably need to look at your life every 5 years or so and say, okay, what would we do now?
What about fighting? Do you think you should talk about how you fight before you get married?
Most people know by the time they get married how they fight.
So it could be an important conversation to have. Or who's taking care of the kids?
Right. Who's taking care of the kids? What is the expectation for how we're going to parent our children? A lot of this you can't know, but until you do it, right? A lot of this you can't know, but being able to have healthy conversations about how will we resolve conflict and testing it. You know, think of a conflict you've had while you've been engaged. Did it get resolved, or did everybody decide to live with it?
And that would be a mistake, you think?
That would be a mistake. If you are unable to resolve issues in a way that is satisfactory to both of you, it is not a good idea to get married. And many people get married knowing that this is not working, that these issues exist, and you're probably going to get divorced eventually.
Yeah, the deal breakers need to be addressed before you walk down the aisle.
They do. And you need to know that you can work through hard things together, because the deal breakers might change.
What's one piece of advice you would get a newly young engaged couple before they get married so that they don't end up in your office?
Part of this is just luck. And part of it is just good luck. We hope this works for you. The people who are likely to make it are the people who it's easy to be together. If it's hard to be together, it's going to be even harder to make it as a married couple. And you might still get married. Lots and lots of people still get married.
And probably end up in your office.
And they probably end up in my office. And is that okay? It is. It's okay. Yeah. It's not the end of the world. It's what we got.
Divorce is a part of our society.
Divorce is a part of life. There's no way to avoid the fact that you might break up.